Alrighty, so we are live on Coding with Jess. Welcome to Thursday morning, where we are once again live streaming, playing with software, learning how stuff works. So today we're going to be continuing our exploration of RedwoodJS. Had a lot of fun digging into this for 2 hours last week. If you haven't watched the live stream for last week, you can hit my Twitter profile to see the link to last week's live stream, as well as like a little Twitter, a little tweet stream of kind of my takeaways from last time. So we didn't make it terribly far through this tutorial, so you're not missing a whole lot. But my goal today is I'm going to be going through RedwoodJS, the tutorial. This is, again, we're on like my third hour of playing with the tool. I didn't cheat and spend a ton of time playing with the tool over the last week, so I'm still kind of fresh to the experience of playing with it. And I'm just going to be kind of going through it from a developer experience standpoint of this isn't like a technical assessment of Prisma and Apollo and React and how they're tying all these things together. This is more like, how would this work if I wanted to build something out of it? And I guess the further caveat I should give before we dive in is that I am not an expert in React. I am not an expert in Prisma or Apollo. I'm a Ruby on Rails guy who's been building software for like 15 years. I know JavaScript reasonably well, but by no means should you expect me to explain to you the new way that hooks work with single file components in RedwoodJS, right? It's not why I'm here. I'm just here because as a guy who wants to use RedwoodJS to do stuff, which I think is true of many of us. And so we're going to dive in and see what that's like together today. So if you've ever hung out with me on a stream before, you know that we always work in Pomodoros. So this will be a 2-hour stream. I'll do 4 Pomodoros, 25 minutes working, and then 5-minute breaks in between each one. So the first thing we'll do as we're getting started is start our first Pomodoro and then dive right in, take off where we started last week. Lewis, good to see you, man. I'm glad you're able to join us again today. Let's see. Okay, so I was saying last week we got we started out with the tutorial and made it a decent way in. We got to let's see. I think the step that we got to last week was right to where we were doing some dynamic work and we were about to dive into cells. Which honestly, I'm really excited for this week because cells is to me is one of the most interesting things about the way that Redwood works. And I don't understand a lot of it. I know it ties together the technologies that got me interested in Redwood in the first place. And so I'm excited to dive in this morning and see what we can learn about it. All right, so let's see, I'm gonna pull up our repo, not Spotify new releases. I'm not working on that one this morning. Maybe next week. Maybe we'll be back to Spotify next week. Let's see, Redwood blog tutorial. Bump this up in size for you a little bit. And I'm going to go over to our terminal. And if I remember correctly, it's like Redwood start or something. So Redwood has a really nice CLI. It's really handy to use. And they have yarn redwood dev. That's the command. So you have yarn first, or type yarn first, and then it's namespace down to this like redwood command. It also, I think you can also short it to R. So yarn, maybe not. Doesn't like me, huh? There we go. Yarn redwood dev. All right, let's see. So here's our blog. We can now click back and forth between the home page and the about page. And we are currently on the layouts page. It's funny looking at the layout or oh no, I need to switch to my, just realized I wasn't looking at the desktop. Rookie mistake, right? Okay, so now you should be seeing my screen in addition to seeing my face. So thanks, Lewis, for calling that out. Yep. This is actually the first time that so I'm always tweaking my streaming setup. This is the first time that I decided to use like a full screen headshot when I started the stream before I switched over to the desktop. Normally I actually just start on the desktop with my face down in the bottom right hand corner and get going. So yeah, note to self, after you're done introducing yourself, switch to the desktop. All right, so this also, I was just going to point out that this looks a little funny to me looking at the tutorial this way. Last week, you may remember the tutorial website was down for a moment, and so when we were trying to look at it, so we ended up switching over to browsing it in the Redwood GitHub profile, or GitHub page, which the nice thing about the GitHub version of the Redwood tutorial is that it is all on one page. Having it broken up across pages is kind of nice from a digestibility standpoint, but it's harder to like Command F between things in the tutorial. So yeah, trade-offs. I'll try using this layout for now, but we may switch over to the GitHub version just to have it all in one single file. Okay, so from now on we'll use the shorter G alias. This is what I was talking about, the command line, getting dynamic, creating the database schema. So we did this last week. Switch over to our IDE. We created a SDL file, which is the schema, and then this schema.prisma file. And I think one of the last things that I was commenting on last week is just how it felt like there was some duplication between these files, and it also wasn't entirely clear to me yet what those different files are doing. Thanks, Lewis. I'm glad it's better now. Yeah, definitely better when you can see my screen when I'm talking about it. And it's funny because I spend most of my day on Zoom calls where I need to be sharing my screen too, and it happens all the time. Still, you just never get used to it. All right, so we have created the database schema and run the migration. I'm pretty sure we got all the way to the end of this step, but let's go ahead and check. This was the scaffolding we generated last week. I think that is currently live in our thing at /posts, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there it is. So you can use this scaffolding. The scaffolding created a bunch of stuff for us that allows us to go ahead and write to and read from the database, as well as interact with it in a bunch of ways. And I was commenting that that scaffold, there's a lot for us to understand in the scaffold. All right, so let's pick up right here. I think this is where we left off last time. I was talking about how I really appreciated the defaults of singular and plural and paying attention to that kind of stuff. So creating a home page, we can start by replacing these pages one by one as we get designs, or maybe move them to the admin section. Yep. We already have home page, so we don't need to create that. We want to display a list of posts to the user, so we'll need to add that logic. We'll need to get the content from the database, and we don't want the user to just see a blank screen in the meantime. True. Depending on network conditions, server locations. So we want to show some kind of loading message and animation. So this is where the cell thing is they're about to say, and presenting cells, right? Because cells is going to supposedly tie all this together. It's going to tie together a loading state, some kind of error state, as well as what actually happens once that data is loaded onto the screen. So this is going to be very interesting to see how this all ties together. It'd be nice if there was some kind of blank slate message. All right. What do we do? Cells. All right. So yeah, as they were saying, the features in cells, loading states, empty states, failure, success, are pretty common in most web apps. Unfortunately, I can say from having worked on a lot of web apps that we as developers don't often pay attention to these features, right? This is often something that gets layered on later. Of like, oh yeah, we probably do need some sort of blank state, or it would be nice if the user had some idea that things were loading from the back end. So the fact that this is baked in out of the box with Redwood is pretty cool, and so I'm pretty excited to see how this all works together. It's kind of like intelligent defaults that force you to do the right thing, so it's pretty neat. All right, when React renders this component, so let's read through this from top to bottom. So we're gonna, I believe this cell already exists in our, let's see, they weren't super clear in the tutorial here, but I believe this cell already exists in our, based on the scaffold. So let's see. So reminding myself what the code organization, remember everything is split into a front end and a back end, the front end being the web folder, the back end being the API folder. And so that would be on the front end, in the web folder, probably. And then in the web folder, we have a source directory that has components, layouts, and pages. I'm guessing it's probably in a page. There is the posts page, and it imports a cell from source components post cell. Okay, So for whatever reason, cells, I guess that makes sense because we talked about yesterday how one of the other things that that Redwood, in my opinion, gets right or kind of restores is some order, some general order around this component in React represents a specific kind of thing. So they divide components into 3 classes: layouts, pages, and then like components. Components being the sub part, you know, like partials in Rails, if you're familiar with that terminology, but kind of the thing that you embed within pages. So I guess it would make sense that the post cell would be a specific kind of component and live in the components folder. So let me think here. Import post from source components post. So that's going to import a singular view of the, okay, so that's how we're going to render it. Interesting. Immediately I'm looking at this and going, why is this not in a cells directory? So there's 2 parallel directories going on here. I don't know if you're noticing this, but there's post cell and then there's the post component. The post component contains a component in the true sense of the word, right? I'm not sure why this lives here, honestly. The post cell, it's not even a component. It supports a component, but I think one of the cool things about one of the cool things about Redwood is they go with this like single file component model where everything that you need for a component is stored in a single file. And having the cells live in this components directory, I guess having it live alongside the source, I don't know. Anyway, it's an interesting choice. It is where it is, and here it is. So this is what they're walking us through in the tutorial right now, is this this post cell, and they're going to kind of explain each part of it from top to bottom. So we already have the code in there. Let's walk through it and see if we can understand what it's doing. So up here at the top, we've got export const query GraphQL. So look, we've got a const that represents a GraphQL query. I may not be a GraphQL expert, but I have read and written some GraphQL queries. So this looks pretty familiar to me. Pretty standard query that's pulling back posts from our GraphQL API on the back end. And off of that posts table, or I don't know what you call the concept in GraphQL, but whatever they are, it's pulling the ID, the title, the body, and the created at, and then feeding that back. So, okay. So there's my constant, and I'm guessing that's going to get fed in somewhere here. I'm kind of glancing down looking for where this query const is getting used and not seeing it, but I guess it's an export, so it's most likely going to get used over here in this post cell, or sorry, in the post, let's see. Let me make, so yeah, it's probably going to get used in this post.js where it's getting imported. Except it's not getting imported over here. Interesting. I guess it's the other way around. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I remember now looking at the cell. The cell is actually importing post from source components and then passing in post here. Interesting. Am I looking at the right cell? This is posts. This is posts cell. Important distinction there. Again, like we talked about yesterday or last week, the distinction between plural and singular is important. It's meaningful. It's a meaningful distinction in RedwoodJS, and so you got to pay attention to it. So this is the posts cell, which is importing links and routes. It does have an empty state already defined. This already looks a little different than their tutorial. Okay, this is just saying a typical cell. All right, I'll follow along with this instead of trying to like trace it back to our code base for now, because I think that's what they want me to do. All right, perform the query and display the loading page, the loading component until a response is received. That makes sense. So this is going to be, here is the component that will be rendered while the posts are being returned. Again, like, what this looks like to me, just like glancing at this right now, is sort of like a bag of functions that are clustered together in this thing called a cell, and then they're going to get used inside the posts. So I'm just going to treat them that way, of like loading. Here's a snippet of I guess now that I'm thinking about it this way, some of these functions are components, like loading is an actual component, empty is an actual component, failure is. success is. So these are components, and maybe they do belong in the components directory, because I can kind of see where they're going from a code organization standpoint. All right, so here's the nice thing. You already have a component that will live there, and while it's loading that query, if it comes back with nothing, the query comes back empty, the GraphQL comes back empty, you have a component that will get swapped in as soon as that query is done. And then if the if the GraphQL query fails for any reason, you also have a component. You also have a component that'll get loaded and swapped in. And then finally, you have what will get displayed if all of them get pulled back. All right, success component. There are some lifecycle helpers like before query that are not in here, but are in here. All right, note to the tutorial writers, this is something we might want to come back and fix. It looks like there's supposed to be a before query in this block here. It's in the code that the scaffolding command generated, but it's not in the tutorial itself. But okay, there's some lifecycle helpers like before query for massaging any props before being given to the query, so you can kind of change up what you pass to the query, pull the props from somewhere else. The minimum you need for a cell are query and success. If you don't export an empty result, empty results will be sent to your success component. And if you don't provide a failure component, you'll get error output in the console. Cool. Rob, thanks for joining, man. So Rob's one of the core contributors to Redwood. He's hanging out in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Rob, I was just noting that it seems like there's something missing here in terms of like the before query and after queries. It might be helpful to like throw them in here for a typical cell, since you're referring to them right here below. Just a small thing. Okay, so interesting. I want to read this again though. If you don't provide a failure component, you will get error output sent to the console. I guess that makes sense. So in other words, instead of passing that error through and showing it in the front end when there's no way to know how the front end should deal with that failure, we'll put it in the console. I would assume you'd also get it in the console as well, even if there was a failure component. But maybe that means if you need to know if it's failing, go look at the console. A guideline for when to use cells if your component needs some data. Okay, here's when we should use cells. If your component needs some data from the database or other services that may be delayed. Looks like we may be having some internet troubles. I'm seeing my stream settings say things are slowing down. I was noticing this morning, hopefully this will pick back up in a second here. I was noticing this morning that Raleigh, my area, had been one of the areas of the US that's been experiencing like 20 to 40% drops in bandwidth based on, the whole world having to move online right now. So hopefully our stream help will come back in just a second. All right, well, this may be glitchy as I'm going through, but I'm going to keep moving, and hopefully our bandwidth will come back up again. Okay, so our first cell. So we've got our post cell. So this is like, okay, so we generated all these files with the scaffold generator. And now it looks like we're going to create a cell that's specifically for the front end user. It's a little bit more limited in scope and what it provides. So we're going to go ahead and, it looks like the abbreviation is RW. I missed that earlier. I tried yarn R, not it, yarn RW. Okay, sounds good. Yarn RW, generate a cell. This new cell is called blog posts. Just in case you guys can't. All right, cool. It says excellent connection, stream is back up healthy again. All right, so as I was saying, yarn, Redwood, generate cell, blog post. So we're going to make a new cell that's for displaying blog posts on the front end. So that's going to create a single file and its associated test file with some boilerplate for us. Okay, so let's go see what the boilerplate looks like. All right. This is blog post cell. Okay, cool. Says the stream is healthy now, so hopefully that was the last little blip we experienced today. Thank you, Raleigh area internet and COVID virus. Okay, so here's our here's the default that we get. We get this query that's just pulling that, just fetching the ID of blog posts. Again, okay, interesting. We've got loading, empty, failure, and success. Interestingly, there is no blog posts object in our database, so I'm curious how we're going to go about tying this to something real. We have a posts table. So in generating, you can use any case you'd like, and Redwood will do the right thing when it comes to naming. Oh, that's cool. So you can use underscore case, you can use snake case, camel case, Pascal case, whatever you'd like, and Redwood will name it appropriately. So we've got our blog post cell. Is the name of our component here. To get you off and running as quickly as possible, the generator assumes you've got a root GraphQL query named the same thing as your cell and gives you the minimum query needed. We don't, but that's okay. In this case, it's called blog posts, so we'll have to rename that to posts. Okay, that's where I was going with that. So we're going to rename this to posts. Right now, it just has ID, but we're going to probably want to give some more stuff to that. In both the query name and the prop named in success. There we are. Change word. It could be pretty cool to have like a an alternate command passed to this, where you could say like query : and give it like posts, and it would automatically like interpolate the right GraphQL object into the file, so that I didn't have to change it later. I don't know. That may already exist. You guys have been very thoughtful, so I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so I've done that. I've changed blog post to posts, which matches the name of our object in the database, or our table in the database. So let's plug this cell into our homepage and see what happens. Yes, let's. Import blog layout, post cell. All right, so there's the two imports we'll need. Let's bump over to our, I'm gonna drop this over here on the right so I can have both open at the same time. Homepage, here we are. Blog layout, interesting. Doesn't like my import here. Well, we're about to replace it. Let's see, we're gonna put a blog posts cell. I'm sure if I had my VS Code set up all fancy, it would have like auto done that import for me, but I'm not as cool as all the cool kids. But again, like I was talking about last week, when I'm learning something new, like a new framework or something, I try to type everything out rather than copy pasting, just to kind of get the commands and stuff in my fingers. Find that to be really helpful, even though it does take more time. Okay, great. So we have a blog post cell. It's showing a query, basically. So let's see what they want us to do next with that. We've now inserted it in there, but all we have is a query. And that shouldn't be surprising, right? If we go open our posts, it's called blog post cell. Again, I'm this cell and component thing. I have to get my head around that. So it's just stringifying, JSON stringifying the posts object that it's getting back from the database, which only has the ID in it because we're only specifying that. So in the success component, where did posts come from? Notice in our query object that we're making it posts, plural. Whatever the name of the query is, that's the name of the prop that will be available in success. You can alias the name of the variable containing the result of the GraphQL, and that will be the name of the prop. I don't actually understand what that sentence means, but I'm going to let it go. Now, post IDs will be available in success instead of posts. I'm going to make this a little bigger for you guys. In addition to the ID that was added to the query with the generator, let's get the title, body, and created at. Okay, so we're going to add some fields that we want to fetch from our backend. One thing I was looking at that just immediately recurred to me as I saw this generated thing is if I could alias. I don't know that you would want to do this. This might be a bad idea. But if I could alias this and say posts, it could go look automatically for my posts, like my SDL file, I feel like. schema Prisma, and know that there's a title, a body, a created at, and go ahead and put those in here as well. So I don't know that that's a good idea. Probably want to start by accessing the minimum amount of things and force people to type them out. But I don't know, just an interesting idea to kind of give the front end more awareness of what you've already specified in your schema on the back end. But anyway, all right, so there's our one post. In their example, they have two. I've only created one. Now we're in the realm of good old React components. So just build out the success component, display the blog post in a nicer format. All right, so let's do that. So instead of just stringifying this, we're going to take the posts object, we're going to map over that object, and for each post, we will, oops. For each post, we are going to put an article to the screen with the ID in the key there. There's something meaningful about that key in React land. I'm sure someone that can comment on that in the chat while I'm typing this out, but something like each HTML object should have a unique key in order for the DOM to render appropriately or optimize appropriately or something like that. I vaguely remember reading that at some point, somewhere. But again, not an expert in React, so don't expect me to be able to regurgitate the reasons why you do that. Okay, so we've got our post.created at. All right, so we've got an article with a header that has the title of the blog post. We now have a paragraph tag with the body of the blog post, and then we actually show when we're posted at. Wow, we're at the end of our first Pomodoro already. Okay, so I'm gonna give us 5 more minutes to kind of wrap up where we are, and then we will take a break in just a second. Okay, so popping back over, failed to compile, and that would be because I can't type. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Try parentheses. Oops. Okay. And we're going to be returning post.map. Wait. I'm probably copying this incorrectly. Nope, that was correct. Having curly braces there. Oh, I'm missing a paren. When in doubt, add a paren. There it is. Great. All right, Redwood's middle name is awesome. It has no last name. Someone should work on that. Okay, cool. So now we are now outputting all of our posts to the screen and our blog. And just like that, we've got a blog. It's the most basic, ugly blog, but you can now go to /posts. You can add a new post. RedwoodJS tutorial. I'm not a very accurate typist, they tell me. Save, and we go back to our home page, and there it is. Pretty cool. So that was pretty nice. We had a pretty simple little access to the backend database through this GraphQL query that is right here. So kind of following that idea of the everything should be in one place so that I can see how it's being used and make quick changes to it. That was actually a pretty nice experience. So I can see exactly what the screen will show if it's loading. I can see exactly what will happen if there's empty or a failure message. And I can basically customize how it's going to look on the failure. I mean, on success. The nice thing I like about this too is that most likely these themselves will end up being references to components, right? Like I can extract this out of this file and put this into kind of a partial once it gets onerously long. And then I can pass in the things that I need to pass in. So cool. So a natural thing to do here would be to extract that into a post component, or even utilize the post component that I think the generator created. All right, so what did we do? We have generated a homepage, a blog laid out. We defined a database schema. We ran migrations to update that database. We scaffolded a CRUD interface, and that gave us our sort of admin style interface that's available at /posts. And then we created a new cell that's on our homepage for the user to be able to see those different states as well as, and then we added it to the page. So it says this will become the standard life cycle of new features as you build a Redwood app. This makes a lot of sense to me. I'm working with teams at Lambda School right now, teaching them software development, and I have some teams that are working on GraphQL, Prisma, Apollo stacks, and that kind of thing. And we have the classical divide between React on the front end with a front end database or a front end repo, and then a back end that is serving up the data. And there's definitely that life cycle of feature development where they go and add the table on the back end, then add the API middle layer, and then go to the front end and then wire up the GraphQL query to access the back end or to access the API, and then build the component that like takes the stuff from GraphQL and displays it on the screen. And so there's this life cycle that those teams have to go through. The problem is it's a really long life cycle when you have two, like a back end and a front end repo, and you have some pretty, you have a lot of boilerplate code that you end up writing, especially if they're not using Prisma and Apollo and they're like hand writing a Express backend where they're a Node.js and Express, and they're having to build each one of those API endpoints by hand and then do all of the wiring up on the front end. It's kind of amazing what you get with Redwood with a pretty simple set of commands that allows you to, so I could see how you could get through this life cycle of feature development a lot faster and spend your time on sort of the meaty things of making the component look right on the screen, and styling things up. And I do feel like this already cuts down on the boilerplate, and like we talked about a little bit, there's even opportunities for us to like cut down further. Okay, so we are at the end of our first Pomodoro. I made it 30 minutes instead of 25 minutes, but we will. Alrighty. Woo! Okay, let me go tweet and let people know that we're back, and then I will get started again. Ah, wow, that was... Talk about all of it. All the internet's melting down. Okay, let's see. Okay. All right, cool. Woo! That was interesting. Things you don't expect to happen while you're live streaming. YouTube to go down completely. I mean, I was literally checking everything on my side, like ensuring that it wasn't something that I was doing or that wasn't my local internet, but that's definitely not my first thought, is that like the external service is down. It's usually like, what's going on with my internet? Okay, so back into the game here. I'm gonna go ahead and start a tomato timer, and we're gonna go for 25 more minutes exploring RedwoodJS. So for those of you who may have missed something earlier this morning, or you're just now tuning in, what we've done so far is we're going through the tutorial, and this morning we went through and created our own cell. I also talked through how Redwood works with data, the different GraphQL and services layers that they use. One of the reasons that they group all their resolvers into these services files. And now we're going on to routing. This is actually one of the cooler things that RedwoodJS does. So I'm excited to kind of dig in and see a little bit more detail about how they handle routing. All right, so let's build a detail page. We've now have a single page at the home page that displays every single blog post, all the information about the blog post. But you might want to be able to actually link to a direct blog post, like post/1 or something like that. That page, oh yeah, that's right. We have this whole scaffolded interface. But yeah, you might want to be able to like have some sort of link to that goes direct to a single blog post instead of going to every single blog post. So it looks like that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to do yarn redwood generate a page. Remember, a page is one of the 3 types of like sort of components in Redwood land, although I'm starting to want to group cells into like a type of component as well. But yeah, so yarn redwood generate a page, and we'll call this page blog post. Notice the singular. Remember, pluralization matters in Redwood. And this is going to generate a blog post page along with the associated test file. Again, this is a React component, and then the associated test file is just a simple does it render React testing library test for this blog post page. Okay, great. Now we've got this. Notice that it says updating the routes file, and I have a feeling that's what we're about to talk about here. Now we can't note that we can't simply call this page post because our scaffold already created a page with that name. Sure. In retrospect, I might have scaffolded it as like post admin or something like that to not occupy that namespace in my application. And like we talked about, the scaffolds are probably most useful as admin pages. So now let's link the title of the post on the home page to the detail page. That should be pretty straightforward. So we're going to go over to our home page. Bring that up, and right now, wait, we're gonna have to do that in the blog posts cell. Right, so we have this blog post cell component that's getting imported on our home page. There's the component itself, and then here is the post that it's mapping over, and then we're gonna want to link probably the header, yep, the H2, to an individual blog post. So let's do that. /link to equals routes. And I know I haven't done the import yet. We'll have to do that in just a second. Routes.blogpost. And that's what we're going to go find out. Where does that cool function come from? In just a second, we'll go look at that. And then this thing is going to be called, we're just going to, oh, we already have post.title down there, but I'll just delete it. Boop, boop, boop. Gone. And now we need our import up here at the top. Import link routes from RedwoodJS/router. Well, that's kind of cool. Anyway. Okay. So if you click the link on the homepage now, we should be able to go to a blog post page. Very cool. All right, what we really need to do is specify which post we want to link to. Yes. Okay, so if you notice this, every single blog post on my homepage links to the same template, but we need to actually link to a specific blog post and see that pulled up. So let's see, how would we do that? So our route path, this is in routes.js. Let's go up and open up our router. We've looked at this a little bit. The route that got added when I did that generate was this line 15 here. So blog post page got added. The name is blog post. And we're going to need to customize that. It looks like we're going to add like a /ID. And then that lets us do something like I was hinting at earlier, /blog post /1. Okay, that was kind of magical. Now, okay, basically that only changed the path. So ID is now getting passed in somehow. There it is. Redwood calls this a route parameter. They say whatever value is in this position in the path, let me reference it by the name inside the curly braces. That's a good explanation. So basically that takes that 1 and I can now reference it by the name ID. So in our link to, that's now a parameter in the function. Okay, cool. So let's go back over to our home page, or no, like blog page component, blog post page component. Feels really redundant, but actually it's going to be in our blog post pages, blog post pages, blog post cell. I really want to extract this from the blog post cell thing into its own component. We can do that later. So in our link to here, in this blog post function, which is created by that in this routes file here, we can now reference that ID, and we can look for, what does that mean exactly? ID is post.id. Oh, okay. I guess this has an object called, so something is confusing me here. Why is this ID post.id? That's going to be pulling from this post that it's, oh, okay, got it. So I forgot what we were doing for a second here. So what we're doing here is building the link that's going to be in the header on this page. So this link right here is getting built. And so what we're doing when it's building the route is we need to tell the route exactly what the value of that ID parameter is so that it can append it to the URL line. So now what we should see is, wow, that's interesting. ID, that doesn't look right. For routes with route named, did I mess something up here? We've got blog post /ID. So it looks like it's garbling that parameter somehow. This is basically taking quote ID. Did I add a quote somewhere when I wasn't supposed to? Huh. Post.id. All of that looks good to me. What if we just manually substitute 1 here? See what happens. Well, that works. That's just 1. It almost looks like my posts don't have a valid ID. How are we looking now? Oh, okay. It's working now. That was odd. Normally an auto refresh would, give me the most recent thing and we'd be in good shape. That was very strange. Okay, well, continuing on. So now we have our links are built appropriately. What's not happening is that we're not pulling the correct blog post to present in this blog post page. So how are we going to do that? I would imagine. So again, trying to solve the problem before it's presented, I would imagine we would need to tell this blog post page to go look up the post and then pass it in somehow here. But we have those resolvers that already exist, so maybe we're going to end up importing the resolver for blog posts and then have the object that way. I don't know. That's my guess. We'll see what it says. So we're building using the param. Yep. So the ID is in the URL. What do we need to do next in order to display a specific post? Sounds like we'll want to do some data retrieval, which means we want to sell. Right. Of course. This is the life cycle that we were talking about a second ago that I should have predicted that we were actually doing. Okay, so we're going to create a new cell, yarn redwood, generate cell, blog _ post. All right, so now we have a blog post cell in addition to a blog posts plural cell. And again, this should look really familiar. We're probably going to want to pull in title and body as well as created at, I'm guessing. And then we'll use that cell in blog post page. Yeah, so there's the import that I was trying to figure out what would be imported. So it wouldn't be the resolvers because the resolvers are getting used. Anyway, I'm still confused by the services file, the cell, why I want one versus the other, but it's all good. We'll stick with this for now. All right, so in our blog post page, we do want to wrap the whole thing in a blog layout. So let's do that. Blog layout. That way we have our title and such blog layout from source/layout/blog layout. All right, we've got that. And then we'll want in here to render the blog post cell. And again, remember the reason we want to do that is that, oh, and I'm going to import that too. Blog post cell from, oh, kind of dot, nope. Blog post cell. So the reason we want to do that is that the cell is going to handle all the things around data access. So this is something I'm really going to have to think about to get my head around, but I think once I do, it will make a ton of sense, which is that the cell itself handles things like loading states, error states, success states, as well as blank state, empty state. And so that is why I want to use, but what is a cell really? Like, why couldn't I just have these consts live in this page? I guess I'm going to need to see a more sophisticated example of a cell to understand why this is a tremendous benefit of having it in a separate file. It seems like it goes against the idea of like having everything in one file, that you would like, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, and obviously the authors of this framework have been much more thoughtful about this idea, thoughtful enough about cells that they put it on the homepage, right? Of like, it's an important sort of first-class citizen. But this almost looks like like I said, like a bag of functions or an instance of like the command pattern where you have the things that, like, there's 6 different ways that things could go, or 4 different ways: loading, empty, failure, success, and you go the right way. I don't know. Still thinking through this idea. It doesn't come naturally to me yet, but I'm sympathetic, so I'm willing to withhold judgment. Okay, so we're gonna make some changes to our query. So our cell, remember back to our original problem, we want to fetch a specific blog post from the database. That's what we want to do. So we're gonna need to modify our GraphQL query so that when it hits the GraphQL API on the back end, it pulls back the appropriate cell. I'm sorry, the appropriate blog post. So right now we need to add a parameter to our blog, so our GraphQL query. There it is, $ID. So again, this is the format of the query. Remember, we need to change this to post because it's not actually a blog post, it's a post. Similarly here, post. And then ID, whoops. Let's do ID colon $ID there. I am not a GraphQL expert, as I've said several times, so I can guess at what that does, but I don't know what that really does. I think what that should do is allow me to pass in so we need to now start passing down that ID parameter. So we're going to start with the ID parameter at italics, right? Route parameter. So that route parameter is automatically available with that name in the page. Okay, and then how would I, oops. So then I need to pass in, so then that's it. That's how I access this route parameter inside the component, and then I can pass it in to child components using the standard React syntax there. And that should give me most of what I need. Can't resolve blog post cell. Okay, I probably did a bad import here. Blog post cell. Oh, it's because it's not in sources. It's in components. All right. Response not successful. Received status code 400. Interesting. Okay. We'll see what that, I don't know if it's supposed to work yet. Nope, it's not supposed to work yet. That's what felt weird to me. How does the ID end up as the $ID in the GraphQL PM? That was the question I had as I was looking at this. Is like, how does this ID that's getting passed in from this cell end up here, interpolated into this GraphQL query appropriately? If you learn anything about Redwood by now, you should know it's going to take care of that for you. Any props you give to a cell will automatically be turned into variables and then given to the query. It's true. Except something's wrong. By the way, this error message you're seeing is thanks to the failure section. So we could change this, right? Horrible, no good, error. And that will tell us horrible, no good, error. Yep. So that's what's rendering is the failure component there. If you take a look at the Web Inspector console, sure, let's do that. Oof, Web Inspector, you are tiny. Let's move you down to the bottom. If I can remember how. Let me shrink you a little bit. I think I lost the... Not the console sidebar. There we go. Doc side down below. Thanks, Chrome. All right, so what do we see down here? Variable ID got invalid value 1. Expected type int. Int cannot represent non-integer value 1. Of course. Okay, so this was a thing back in Rails world. Route parameters come in as strings. GraphQL requires an int. So that's what's going on. This this /1 is this ID is getting passed in here, but it's saying you absolutely must ensure that this is an int in terms of format. Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. All of the things on your URL line should be a string by default, unless you coerce them into another type. So okay, I am good with that. I think that's actually reasonable. Protection there. Turns out that route params are extracted as strings from the URL, but GraphQL wants an integer for the ID. We could use parseInt to convert it, but honestly, we can do better than that. Okay, let's see. What if we could request the conversion right in the route's path? That is pretty cool. I'll admit, guys, that's pretty cool. So I can come into the routes file, and I can actually specify the type of the route parameter in the route itself. So I imagine eventually you'll be able to do things like that, and like, I don't know, what other types might you want to use? Int seems like the most obvious one that you'll have to coerce into. I guess you might end up doing custom stuff like that at some point, but that is pretty nice. That is pretty nice. Not only will this convert the ID parameter to a number before passing it, it will prevent the route from matching unless the segment consists only of digits. Now that's even cooler. So the route won't match now if I put in blah, 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 404 page not found. That is rad. Oh, I love it. Okay, that, you sold me. So it's not only a coercion, but a pattern matching thing. Yeah, that is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. What if I want to pass some other prop to the cell that I don't need in the query, but I do need in the success and loader components? Okay, why would I want to do that? What if I want to pass some other prop to the cell that I don't need in the query? Well, all the props you give to the cell will automatically be available as props in the render components. So that makes sense. So basically what we're saying is, what if we passed in something like that? Would that be available here? Yeah, rand equals math.random. And then I can pass in, oops, let's see, name. Oh, but we're not going to have any errors anymore. I need it in success. Name. Okay, I think I get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and back that out. Very cool. That's pretty handy. Thanks again, Redwood. Okay, displaying a blog post. Now let's display the actual post instead of just dumping that query into result. Okay, great. So now we're actually going to create a component instead of changing the instead of just changing the success component here in the cell. We're going to include a new component called blog post. So let's go create that. Yarn, Redwood, generate me a component. Yeah, component. Call it blog post. I like how earlier in the tutorial they used the underscorized version of that just to demonstrate, look, our CLI handles all different casings. Okay, what did that generate for us? That generated both a blog post component and the test file. Blog post. There it is. And so we're going to want to make some changes to that. So we'll want the title to be title. But first we're going to want to pass in. We know we're going to want the post to be passed in here. Import link routes from, we're also going to need a, yeah, make a link in here. I'm not sure what we're going to link to. Whoops. Single ticks. Let's see what we end up linking to here. All right, we're going to start with an article, and then a header, and then an H2, and then a link. And we're going to link to, interesting. So we're going to make the header link to itself, basically. Post.id. Post.title. And then inside it, we'll make a div called body. Or we'll make a div with the body in it. Okay, post.body. I think we're about coming up on our break here. Let me see. Oh man, called it. And let's see what that does for us. I think that will, oh, one more thing I'll have to do. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break and be back in just a second. Thanks for those of you who tuned back in after YouTube crashing in the middle of this live stream. Hopefully the recording is still end-to-end good at the end of this, and those people who weren't tuned into the live stream can actually enjoy it that way. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I'll be right back to continue going through the Redwood tutorial. After this, we're going to include this blog post in our cell and get to see actual specific blog posts pulled back on a route through RedwoodJS. So I'll see you guys in just a few minutes. Whoops, dot a break. All right, we're back for our last Pomodoro on going through RedwoodJS today. This should be a nice little wrap up here for the tutorial. So let's see how far we can get in the next few minutes. So right before the break, we were creating a new cell, blog post cell, that was going into, or sorry, creating a new component, the blog post component that we're going to use in our cell. So we have the blog post component, I think, pretty much wired up like we want it. And now we need to insert it here. So I think this is going to end up being something like this, as with a, what's the parameter it needs? Post. Whoops. Oh wait, it probably will need this, right? Post equals post. I think you can just close it at that point, and we need to do an import blog post from source slash, see if I can remember what it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's okay. Eventually it'll be in the fingers. And source slash components, that's what it is. Components slash blog post. So save here, and something still went wrong. What did I do? Oh, right, because we want to map over all of the posts. Am I adding this to the right place? Why is posts plural getting passed into post? Did I miss something up here? So we created this cell. This is a little confusing to me. Okay. It's like the first oh, okay. The first place that we're doing. Okay, I got it now. All right, I was looking at this top one and going, wait a second, this is really confusing. What they're also saying is when we're using this layout, we should use it in both places, which makes absolute sense. So the blog posts cell, remember me complaining about this all being nested in here? We should probably also have the use the component we just created here as well. So let me go ahead and delete this. And as we map over that, we are going to, if we map over the posts, we're going to do a blog post with a key of post.id, because this is one of those things that has multiple posts on a single page. There's that, and then we'll need to do the import blog post from source slash components slash blog post. There we go. And we no longer need those. Okay, so that's that. That should actually update our homepage. Something went wrong there. Okay, there is something wrong with our blog post. Let's go see what I might have typed incorrectly here. Blog post is pulling a post, return article header h2 links routes dot blog post post dot title post dot body, close that, and export the default. Everything looks good to me here, and that's what we're pulling in. Blog post key post.id. Let's see how useful errors are in RedwoodJS. We're about to find out. Element type is invalid. Expected a string for a class component and you got undefined. You likely forgot to export your component from the file it's defined in, or you might have mixed up default and named imports. Check the render method of success. Yeah, so we've got our render, which is passing in. Okay, let's look at the way it's specified over here. Return posts.map, and then pass in. It's almost like the post that's getting passed in doesn't have the appropriate data with it. Source component. Oh, I bet that is the problem right there. Ah, imports are so fickle. Okay, and so if I jump over here, that's probably gonna be the problem here as well. Again, this is me not fully understanding how imports work and messing that up. All right, cool. So now we have an actual blog post printed out there. Very nice. Okay, let's keep going here. We are done with this section. There we go. So we now know what it's like to use a named, not a named route, a route with a parameter in it, and then be able to customize the data that we fetch and pull back to the screen based on the parameter in the route. So cool, route params. Oh, forms. Everyone's favorite thing. Wait, don't close your browser. You had to know this was coming eventually, yes? Yeah, so forms... Yeah, forms are the bane of a web developer's existence, and yet they're necessary. So I'm curious to see how we're going to handle things here. So it looks like we're going to start out by creating a contact form on our blog, which is a pretty typical thing to do. Here's how you get in touch with me. So let's see how Redwood handles those. The simplest form that makes sense. So first we're going to start out by generating a new page. Again, remember, pages, layouts, components, like the three different kinds of components that that Redwood uses. We're actually going to use one. We're going to use one called page because we're going to add a new route to this thing. It's probably going to be something like contact us or something. So let's go over and type that yarn. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and check in. All right, this is going to be show blog posts on homepage and post page. All right, so we're going to do a yarn, Redwood, generate a new page, and it's going to be called contact. I believe that was what they wanted me to call it. Yep. So that should generate a new pages component or page component in the pages directory, contact page, along with the associated test file, and notice it updates the routes file. So that's probably gonna be one of the biggest differences between doing page and component, where it's stored, and also components don't necessarily update the routes file. So let's go look at the routes file, see what got added. We now have this contact page, so we can come over to here and type /contact, and there we are. We have that new page created. It's really nice how quickly you can go in and add additional pages. So we're going to want to add a link to that page to our blog layout. Again, remember the layout file is the thing that all of the pages are nested within, and that way if I make a change to it, it makes a change for all pages. So we're going to add a new li item that we're going to link to, and we're going to link this to routes.contact, which is a method that's created on that routes function automatically to let us link there. And so now we should be able to go over to our page, and we now have a contact that allows us to get there. Notice the contact page itself is not wrapped in the blog layout. So yep, that's the very next thing we're going to do. Let's go over to contact page and then wrap this guy in a blog layout. And we'll need to do the import. Import, and I'll be very careful not to add those curly braces this time. Don't want those messing with my juju here. Notice the layout file again lives in the layouts directory, which helps you a little bit with just code organization. So back over here, we now should have a contact page that actually has a title or an H1 and has the links on it as well. Cool. Now let's get to the good stuff, as they say. Introducing form helpers. Forms in React are infamously annoying to work with. There are controlled components and uncontrolled components and third-party libraries and many workarounds to try to make forms in React as simple as they were originally intended to be. All right, let's see how good old Redwood is going to help us out in this area. So first thing we want to do is create an empty form. That's pretty straightforward. And so we'll need to start by putting something in that form. Let's put a text field named input. Text field type input. And oh right, we're gonna have to import these fancy. These are not HTML elements. These are actual components that are created for us already by RedwoodJS. So they've got some magic in them, and we're going to find out what that magic is here in just a second. So that comes from their RedwoodJS web package. Ships with several inputs and a plain text input box is out of the box. Okay, cool. Let's see what it ships with. What do we got now? Well, we have this very plain text input. And when I try to submit, I get these errors because I'm not submitting anywhere. Something's showing. How about adding a submit button? Okay, we can do that. Submit. Again, submit is a thing that we'll probably need to import that's probably doing some magic. So here we are. Submit. Again, type error. Same error. Let's see what happens. Try type something in and say save. Nothing blew up on the form. Next, we'll get data. All right. Similar to a plain HTML form, we'll give form an onSubmit handler. That seems reasonable so far. So inside of our component, we're going to declare a function called onSubmit. It's going to have a parameter of some data, and then we're going to do the good old console log to be able to see what that data is. It does not like my const onSubmit there. What is up with that? Oops. Oh, that's good. It's never called. Well, let's see about that. Okay. Still seeing an error here. Oh, I was gonna say, I was like, I know I need to call this somewhere. I didn't notice that change. OnSubmit equals onSubmit. So just have to set that. Have to link up that method that we just declared, that function we just declared, to the form so that it knows that on submission, that's what it should call. So now let's go over and we'll say Jess Martin, hit save, and there it is. Input Jess Martin. Great, it has the name input. We can change that to name. Yep. Okay. So far, not impressed. Everything looks nice. I'm sure it's doing all sorts of magic behind the scenes. Let's see what more useful form by adding a few more fields. Okay, if you insist. Looks like they changed name to name here as well. Let's make one called email. Let's make another one. That's a text area field, so we'll have to add that import up above. And then a message. Text area field. All right, now we've got a bunch of them on the screen. Really ugly like. But now we can put in all those things and we get name, email, and message. Fantastic. Great. let's try adding some labels. Okay, labels is one of the things that makes forms so annoying, actually, because a good form has really well named and really well laid out labels that associate with the form so that you know exactly what to put in there. And honestly, this is one of the layout challenges that we deal with on the web. It's kind of a lot to type for a label. I'm kind of hoping that they're going to give me something magic that's going to do this for me. There's a great form on the Rails side of things that I haven't used in years that I'm trying to, simple form, that even takes care of your labels for you. So you could do like text field with label. The problem with that is, like I mentioned, one of the key issues with labels is that they have to be formatted appropriately to actually show up on the screen in the right place for the user to be able to understand the form. So you notice that like already I'm doing a whole bunch of copy paste here. So makes me want some faster way to do this, but this is the pain of forms. So I guess here we are in the midst of the pain together. All right, let's go over and see what we got. Now we have name, email, and message on their own things. Oh yeah, looks like I missed the style on the submit button to like make it be on its own screen or be on its own line. We set it style to display block, we get that as well. Okay, that should give all of these things their own line. It does. Definitely looks nicer now. With that, try filling out the form. You should get a console message with all 3 fields. I'm sure we will. What's the big deal? That is definitely what I'm thinking. Plenty of libraries that will help me skip creating controlled inputs manually. So what? And you're right. Anyone can fill out a form correctly. What happens when someone leaves something out, makes a mistake? Yeah. Okay. So now they're going to get into form validation, which is another thing that's a pain about forms. So now we're going to make these required. Looks like, yeah, name is, oops, sorry. The label's not required. The text field is required. So here we'll say style display block. Not sure why we're adding a block style on this now, but we are. And then making it required. And then we'll do the same for email and message. Okay. So let me copy this, paste that. Whoops. Email, message. All right. Now what happens? So some magic is going to happen now. I'm going to say Jess Martin and save. Whoa, look at that. Please fill out this field. Please fill out this field. Okay, okay, you got me. Boom. Well, that is pretty fun. Immediate thoughts that jump to my mind are like, why is it styled this way? Why is it styled at all? How can I change those styles? Again, like form styling is just a pain, but kind of necessary evil of the web world. So I imagine they're going to help me out and tell me some of that stuff. Very cool. That is nice. So required, let's update that required call to instead be an object we pass to a custom attribute on Redwood for helpers called validation. Okay. So now we want to, instead of just saying required, isn't this exactly the same thing but with more typing? Yeah, I'm excited to type it out longhand after you showed me the short way to do it. validation equals, all right, make sure that I got everything right here. Okay, so there's, I typed it out longhand. I'm not sure why they want me to do that, but they want me to, so I'm going to do it. And this should be email, and this should be message. Massage. So now that I've typed it out longhand, does it do anything different? Ooh, interesting. Huh. Let's update that required call to instead be an object we pass to a custom attribute. So I did that. Oh. Oh, interesting. Huh. That is kind of interesting. So it's updating focus every time I, okay, cool. Validation required true. That's not at all obvious that that would be what it would do to me. Like I mentioned, like just putting required here instead of validation required true, I would think would do exactly the same thing. Okay, just a stepping stone to their amazing reveal. I'm willing to go along with you, RedwoodJS, for just a little further. All right, so now we get a field error. Oh yeah, text area field. Yep, I've been overriding my fancy text area field here. All right, you happy now? Yep, you are. Okay, so text field, now we've got this thing called field error. So this was something that actually feels very familiar from Simple Form. When back in the day, we used to have, the errors were associated with, we're kind of all, but you can bundle all of these things together, which is, I think, is probably where they're going. I'm not going to cheat. I'm not going to cheat. I'll just keep going step by step. Sorry, reading ahead here. All right, so now what happens when I fail to enter? There we go. That is much better. Okay, so yeah, I didn't really like, I won't say I didn't like the styling, but I didn't like that it was opaque to me how to style that little pop-up thing. I like the little pop-up thing. It's cool. But I'm going to need to have a lot of control how I style this form, because every form that I build in every web application is just a little bit different. And one thing that's really important is to be able to show the information about it the way that you need to. So anyway, I like this. I like this a lot. This is good. It is nice and explicit. I wonder if we might package these up into their own little components. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about, like, there's just a ton of boilerplate code here. It's exactly the same. I'm just thinking about how we might get some of this, reduce some of the typing. The cool thing is now with all of those, I should be able to hit save and see name is required, email is required, message is required, as well as it jumps to focus the first required field. That is pretty cool. That's a lot of valid. So just to point out, a lot is happening here. Again, there's some duplication, but if you just look past the duplication, there's a lot happening here in terms of ensuring that certain validations are met on the form, printing printing an error about that validation, whether it's being met or not. I imagine that you can eventually validate things like length and type, maybe even validate that this is a URL, validate that this is an email. So you probably write your own custom validators, and then it will automatically use their like sentencizing the error. I think one of the reasons that I'm less than impressed is because I've had a chance to play with things like simple form and that kind of stuff. So this is almost like what I would expect it to do, which I guess that's a credit to the Redwood team as well. It's what I expected. Color red. Okay. So basically we're just going to demonstrate that we can actually style these error messages independently, which makes, like I said, the display of the form is critically important in helping a user successfully complete it. Usually forms are the way that we have, users enter data into our application. And so having that be a really clean and obvious experience basically can help us. Oh no, are we out of time for the day already? All right, I'm gonna give us 5 more minutes to kind of wrap up where we are, and then we will finish up here. So now we have red error messages. You know, it would be nice if the inputs somehow displayed the fact that there was an error. Check out the error style. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so this, again, this is really neat, and I really appreciate that you guys have done the work here on this. Again, it's what I would have expected, which is in some ways great. So I can actually specify a style that only gets applied in the case that there's an error on that particular object. So now when I click this, it's going to actually show a red border around my email. Very cool. Love it. What if the label could change as well? It can, but we'll need a custom label component. So labels support error styles as well. Ah, okay. I kind of expected this. I think I know where they're building up to. All right. I think they're going to end up wrapping all of this stuff together. Yeah, give us a trailing comma there, buddy. Thank you. All right, label. You're now a component and not just an HTML file. Style. And so now we actually have access to the error style. Again, it's the same error style we used before, that display block color red. Cool. I could go through and change all these. I guess I will, just for grins. Yes, take that, take that. Label. Again, tons of boilerplate repeated code here, but I think where they're going is the big reveal is gonna be that they wrap all these up into one thing. Let's see. All right, very cool. We've got now have labels that also have their styles. Just trying to hustle through this as fast as possible. In addition to style and error style, we can also use class name and error class name. Okay. So yeah, you could use an externally defined class to define the style instead of having to manually type it in. We should make sure that the email field, okay, custom validation. So now we can actually include a pattern in the email field. So that's going to be down here in our list of validators, right? These are the different things that are validating this form. We can include a pattern for the email. Save that. And so now if I type in, by the way, that's a fancy regex there. If I type in jessmartin@gmail.com, it will tell me that it's okay. But if I type in jessmartin@gmail, it will say email is not formatted correctly. Cool. So that's that's a really nice, like, intelligent error message for not formatted correctly, for not matching that pattern. Definitely not the be all. Yeah, no kidding. I was kind of poking lightly at that regex. Writing emails, regex emails is regexes that match emails uniquely is actually really hard. You may have noticed that trying to submit a form with validation errors outputs nothing to the console. It's not actually submitting. That's a good thing. Fix the errors and all is well. So it like actually prevents the submission of the form until we get it right on the front end, which is really handy. Finally, you know what would be really nice? If the fields were validated as soon as the user leaves each one, so they don't need to fill out the same thing. Yeah, that is, I definitely agree. That would be really nice. So now we can actually have a validation at the form level, which is pretty cool. I like this a lot, actually. And the fact that I can do it, yeah, that's really cool. So now I can come over and go through these. Jess Martin. Oh, my email's not formatted appropriately. Go back. jessmartin@gmail.com. And then this is a test. And now I can actually submit and see those hit the form. So that is very cool. Redwood has one more trick when it's sleeved when it comes to submitting forms. But we'll save it to actually submission. Okay, so I think that's where we're gonna leave off for now. Is we have Redwood's forms are built on top of React Hook Form, so there's even more functionality that we haven't documented here. So I'm very curious. Go ahead and start our break. Stop. That's gonna be our last Pomodoro for the day. So we're just wrapping up here. React Hook Form, performant, flexible, and extensive forms. Yeah, the one thing I would have expected there, and I think I've already mentioned it, but just to call it out again, I would have expected to be able to wrap all of that goodness up in a single, like, and by all of that goodness, I mean the label, the field, and the field error, wrap that all into a single thing, which I would probably call, like I said, text, a single component, text field with error and label. Now I'm starting to look like Objective-C here. But yeah, or maybe it's just like, I don't know, text field with accoutrement. I think that's a great name. I actually don't know how to spell accoutrement, but anyway, yeah, there's just a lot of repetition here. The nice thing is it is explicit. There's also always that trade-off between spelling it out and wrapping it up and hiding it from you. Cool that it's built on top of React Hook Form. That means we could, as React Hook Form gets better and gets extended, then Redwood's forms get more powerful. Okay. Well, that was a lot of fun. Thank you for tuning in to Coding with Jess, where we've been exploring RedwoodJS. We're now 4 hours into going through the RedwoodJS tutorial. I've been trying to kind of talk through, give my impressions from a developer standpoint of how Redwood works. Again, I'm not an expert on React. I'm not an expert on Apollo or Prisma. I'm a guy who's been building software for like 15 years, mainly in the Ruby on Rails world, who is looking for that productivity boost that one day I know will come, that gave me the same productivity boost that I first experienced when I went to Rails. So hopefully Redwood can be that. Really enjoying this. I still have a lot of questions about Redwood. Things like, how does deployment work? And like, how would you actually scale a RedwoodJS application in production? What are the different database and data layer options for Redwood? But anyway, we'll get to those. Thanks for hanging out for the tutorial. This has been part 2 of going through RedwoodJS. There is more to come. I'll definitely be going through Redwood more in the coming weeks, and I'll continue